pay close attention, because what is unfolding today is not an ordinary moment in the sky. There are certain days when the universe whispers, and there are other days when it delivers a verdict. June 2nd, 2026 belongs to the second category. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, a rare energetic checkpoint arrives as the Sun and Saturn form an exact alignment through a 60-degree connection. This is not the kind of astrology that creates excitement for a few hours and then fades into memory. This is the kind that leaves evidence behind. It leaves results. It leaves proof. It leaves a visible mark on the structures you have been constructing quietly while the rest of the world was looking somewhere else. What makes this moment so significant is not what suddenly appears today. It is what has been accumulating beneath the surface for months, perhaps even years. Many people have spent recent seasons wondering whether their efforts mattered at all. They kept showing up without applause. They continued building without guarantees. They invested energy into dreams that seemed to produce little immediate reward. There were moments when the temptation to quit felt stronger than the motivation to continue. There were nights when doubt spoke louder than confidence, yet something deeper kept urging them forward. If that description feels familiar, this alignment is speaking directly to you. Because the energy arriving today does not operate like a lottery ticket. It does not randomly select winners. It does not distribute rewards based on wishful thinking. The force of Saturn has never been interested in empty promises. Saturn measures consistency. Saturn tracks commitment. Saturn observes what you do when nobody is watching. While many people focus their attention on dramatic eclipses, powerful full moons, and headline-grabbing cosmic events, they often overlook the quieter alignments that actually determine long-term outcomes. This is one of those overlooked moments. The Sun represents the center of your identity. It symbolizes your conscious direction, your sense of purpose, and the life force that drives your decisions. Saturn represents something entirely different. Saturn governs responsibility, structure, maturity, and the unavoidable consequences of action. It rules time itself. It rules the process that transforms potential into reality. When these two archetypal forces meet through today's sextile, they create a bridge between vision and execution, between aspiration and achievement. Yet there is a crucial detail most people misunderstand. A sextile is not effortless energy. It is not a current that carries you downstream without participation. It presents possibility, but it requires engagement. Imagine being handed the finest materials available and a perfectly designed blueprint. Everything necessary for success is placed within reach. The only remaining question is whether you are willing to build. That is the nature of a sextile. The opportunity exists, but it must be activated through conscious action. This is why today's alignment feels so different, depending on what has happened before it. For those who have been doing the difficult work, the repetitive work, the work that rarely receives recognition, the effects can become tangible. Agreements move forward. Authority becomes recognized. Boundaries gain strength. Projects receive legitimacy. The effort that once felt invisible begins attracting acknowledgement from the external world. Reality starts reflecting the investment that was previously hidden beneath the surface. For others, the day may seem strangely uneventful. Not because the alignment lacks power, but because Saturn only amplifies what has genuinely been built. If preparation is absent, there is little for Saturn to strengthen. Even that realization carries an important message. It reveals where more commitment is required. In many ways, today's alignment cannot be understood without looking back to February. That was the period when Saturn entered Aries, initiating one of the most important astrological transitions of this era. Saturn requires approximately 29.5 years to complete its journey around the Sun. Its arrival at the beginning of the zodiac marks the start of an entirely new cycle of development. This is not a minor shift. It is a generational reset point. The symbolism of Saturn in Aries is powerful because these energies naturally challenge one another. Aries wants immediate movement. Aries is instinctive. Aries acts first and evaluates later. It represents courage, initiative, and the spark that begins every journey. Saturn moves according to a completely different rhythm. Saturn values planning, patience, endurance, and careful construction. One energy accelerates, the other slows down. One wants action, the other demands preparation. The result is friction. And if the last several months have felt unusually demanding, there is a reason. Many people have experienced an ongoing internal conflict. Part of them wanted to leap toward the future. Another part understood that the foundation was not ready yet. They carried ambitious visions while simultaneously facing the reality that sustainable growth requires structure. They found themselves repeatedly tested. They were asked to prove competence. They were challenged to demonstrate discipline. They were forced to earn authority rather than assume it. This process has not been comfortable. Perhaps you noticed yourself becoming more aware of impulsive reactions. Perhaps you discovered that old habits could no longer support the future you wanted. Perhaps situations repeatedly appeared that demanded stronger boundaries, greater self-control, and more intentional decision-making. What felt like obstacles were often lessons in maturity. What felt like delays were frequently opportunities to strengthen weak foundations before greater responsibilities arrived. That is the deeper story of Saturn in Aries. It is teaching the warrior how to become a strategist. It is teaching courage how to coexist with patience. It is transforming raw desire into directed power. And for those who have accepted that lesson, today's alignment becomes a moment of confirmation. Not because the universe suddenly changed its mind, but because the universe has been observing every step of the process. Imagine an auditor reviewing years of records. Every choice is documented. Every commitment is noted. Every act of discipline is recorded. For months, Saturn has been collecting evidence. Today, the sun shines directly onto that evidence. What was hidden becomes visible. What was uncertain becomes measurable. What was being tested begins receiving recognition. And this is where the story takes an even more intriguing turn. Because, while many people are focused on what happens during June 2nd itself, there is another layer already unfolding beneath the surface. A subtle shift began on June 1st, a movement that prepared the ground before today's alignment fully arrived. The energy was already changing before most people realized it. The atmosphere was already reorganizing itself, and understanding that transition is essential because it explains why the events unfolding now may feel larger, more meaningful, and more consequential than they first appear. There is another layer to this story that makes the timing of everything unfolding right now far more significant than most people realize. Long before the exact Sun and Saturn alignment reaches its peak, another planetary movement quietly changes the emotional landscape beneath your feet. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, Mercury leaves Gemini and enters Cancer. On the surface, this may seem like a simple planetary transition, but psychologically and energetically, it alters the way human beings process reality itself. For weeks, Mercury in Gemini has encouraged speed. Thoughts moved rapidly. Decisions were filtered through logic. Information mattered more than emotion. People analyzed, compared, questioned, and calculated. The mind operated like a machine designed to sort facts and identify patterns. But when Mercury crosses into Cancer, the entire internal dialogue begins to change. Suddenly the heart becomes involved in conversations that previously belonged only to the intellect. Instinct starts speaking louder. Emotional memory becomes impossible to ignore. The need for safety, belonging, and genuine security moves to the center of awareness. You may already be feeling this shift without fully understanding why. Instead of asking whether something makes sense, you begin asking whether it feels right. Instead of focusing exclusively on future goals, you start imagining what life would actually feel like once those goals are achieved. Success stops being an abstract concept. Stability stops being a distant destination. For the first time, your nervous system begins to experience the emotional reality of what you have been working toward. That is why today's alignment carries such unusual power. By the time the Sun and Saturn complete their exact sextile, your consciousness has already been redirected toward emotional truth. You are no longer evaluating achievement from a detached perspective. You are beginning to embody it. The recognition available today is not limited to external events. It reaches deeper than that. It settles into your body. It changes the way you perceive yourself. It transforms achievement from something you hope for into something you can actually feel. Many people spend years chasing validation. They imagine that one promotion, one contract, one breakthrough, or one milestone will finally silence their doubts. Yet when those moments arrive, the internal insecurity often remains. The achievement becomes real, but the identity never catches up. Today's astrology creates a rare opportunity for those two realities to finally meet. You do not merely understand your progress intellectually, you experience it emotionally. You do not simply recognize your growth with your mind. You sense it in your entire being. And that is exactly why what happens next becomes so important. Because there is a factor approaching immediately behind this alignment, and it dramatically changes the energetic landscape. Earlier, I mentioned that one specific element would determine whether this moment becomes a turning point, or simply another missed opportunity. This is where that warning becomes relevant. The opening created by today's Sun and Saturn sextile is exceptionally powerful, but it is also temporary. On June 2nd, clarity dominates. Reality becomes easier to evaluate. Structures become visible. Priorities become obvious. Decisions feel grounded. The truth stands in front of you without disguise. There is strength in the atmosphere. There is order. There is certainty. Yet only one day later, the environment shifts. On June 3rd, Mercury forms a challenging square to Neptune. And Neptune operates according to completely different rules. Where Saturn defines boundaries, Neptune dissolves them. Where Saturn values facts, Neptune blurs distinctions. Where Saturn asks for evidence, Neptune invites imagination, projection, and wishful thinking. This is why the contrast between these 2 days is so dramatic. Today offers precision. Tomorrow introduces ambiguity. Today allows you to see exactly where you stand. Tomorrow makes it easier to confuse hopes with reality. When Mercury and Neptune clash through a square, misunderstandings increase. Assumptions replace facts. People hear what they want to hear rather than what was actually said. The mind becomes vulnerable to distortion. Certainty becomes harder to maintain. Conversations lose definition. Plans become less concrete. Now step back and look at the larger sequence unfolding. The universe gives you a day of remarkable clarity first. Then the fog arrives. That sequence is not accidental. Today functions like a spotlight, illuminating a path before the weather changes. It allows you to see the terrain while visibility remains high. It gives you a chance to make decisions from a position of confidence instead of confusion. This means there is extraordinary value in acting while the window remains open. The agreements that feel solid today are easier to trust because they are being evaluated under Saturn's influence. The commitments you establish now are rooted in reality. The boundaries you define carry authority. The choices you make are supported by a rare combination of self-awareness and practical understanding. If action is delayed too long, the emotional and mental certainty available now may become harder to access. The same situation that appears straightforward today may feel significantly more complicated once Neptune's influence begins coloring perception. This is why today's energy resembles a cosmic authorization process. It is as though an official seal becomes available for a brief period. The documents are ready. The evidence has been reviewed. The approval is waiting. And that symbolism becomes even more meaningful when we examine the profound psychological transformation taking place beneath the surface. One of the most remarkable effects of a harmonious Sun and Saturn alignment is the way it confronts self-doubt. Many people carry a hidden fear that follows them regardless of success. They wonder whether they truly deserve their accomplishments. They question whether they have earned their position. They secretly fear that others will eventually discover they are less capable than they appear. This internal conflict often survives even after years of hard work. It persists despite achievements. It persists despite recognition. It persists despite proof. But Saturn has little patience for illusions of inadequacy. Saturn deals in evidence. And today, evidence becomes impossible to ignore. The countless hours invested when nobody was paying attention. The sacrifices that were never publicly acknowledged. The mistakes survived. The lessons learned. The discipline repeated over and over again. The moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. Saturn places all of it on the table. Then the sun shines directly upon it. Suddenly the story changes. Instead of focusing on what remains unfinished, you begin recognizing how much has already been accomplished. Instead of questioning whether you belong, you begin understanding why you earned your place. Instead of measuring yourself against impossible standards, you start evaluating yourself through the lens of reality. And reality tells a very different story. The confidence available during this alignment is not manufactured positivity. It is not motivational hype. It is not wishful thinking disguised as empowerment. It is the natural result of seeing your own foundation clearly. It is the realization that resilience was built one decision at a time. It is the recognition that strength was earned through experience. It is the understanding that your progress was not accidental. Because of this, achievements connected to this energy tend to possess unusual durability. Agreements hold. Commitments endure. Boundaries remain respected. Structures built under Saturn's approval often stand the test of time because they were constructed upon reality rather than fantasy. And perhaps the most important transformation of all happens quietly within. Before today, there may have been a lingering question living somewhere in the background of your mind, a question you rarely spoke aloud, a question that surfaced during moments of uncertainty. Am I truly worthy of this? Am I really ready for this? Have I genuinely earned this? By the end of this alignment, something changes. Not because someone else answers those questions for you, not because external validation suddenly appears, but because the evidence becomes too overwhelming to deny. The version of you emerging from this moment sees what the previous version struggled to recognize. The work was real. The growth was real. The preparation was real. And the answer Saturn delivers is equally real. The verdict has already been written. The proof has already been collected. The approval has already been earned. Which brings us to an even deeper symbolic layer hidden inside this alignment, one that is revealed through the image of the master musician and the dormant force waiting beneath the surface. What if the true significance of today's alignment is hidden beneath a symbolic language that most people never explore? What if there is another layer operating beneath the planets themselves, one that reveals not only what is happening, but why it feels so deeply personal? To understand that layer, we need to look beyond the aspect alone and into a system known as the Sabian symbols, a collection of 360 symbolic images assigned to the degrees of the zodiac. These images function almost like archetypal stories. They offer clues about the psychological and spiritual themes unfolding beneath an astrological event. And today, the symbolism is impossible to ignore. At this moment, the Sun occupies 12 degrees and 12 minutes of Gemini. Saturn occupies 12 degrees and 12 minutes of Aries. Although they reside in different signs, both fall within the range associated with the 13th degree. What makes this extraordinary is that the Sabian symbols connected to these positions appear to be telling two halves of the same story, a story that mirrors the journey many people have been living throughout the past several years. The image associated with the 13th degree of Gemini is that of a great musician seated at a piano. Pause for a moment and really picture that image. This is not an amateur experimenting with a few notes. This is not someone hoping to become talented someday. This is a master, a virtuoso, a person whose relationship with their craft has been forged through relentless repetition. Behind every effortless performance are countless invisible hours. There were mistakes nobody witnessed. There were frustrating days when progress seemed non-existent. There were sacrifices made in silence. There were moments when the temptation to quit felt stronger than the desire to continue. Yet the musician continued. Eventually, something remarkable happened. Technique stopped feeling mechanical. Practice stopped feeling forced. Skill evolved into artistry. What was once effort became expression. What was once discipline became mastery. That is the deeper meaning carried by the Sun of this degree. The Sun governs identity, visibility, and conscious purpose. Positioned here, it suggests that your voice, your ideas, your communication, your intellectual contributions, and the work you have been refining may no longer belong exclusively behind the scenes. The period of preparation begins, giving way to the period of presentation. There comes a moment in every long journey when the rehearsal ends. There comes a moment when the doors open. There comes a moment when the world finally sees the result of years of invisible dedication. This symbol speaks directly to that threshold. It suggests that what has been developed privately is now capable of standing publicly. Not because of luck, not because of timing alone, but because the level of skill has reached a point where it naturally commands recognition. Now consider the image connected to Saturn's position. The 13th degree of Aries is represented by an unexploded bomb safely concealed. At first glance, this image feels unsettling. It carries tension. It carries danger. It carries the sense that enormous force exists beneath the surface. And that is exactly the point. Aries is one of the most dynamic signs of the zodiac. It is associated with action, aggression, instinct, courage, and raw momentum. It wants immediate expression. It wants movement. It wants release. A bomb symbolizes concentrated potential. It contains tremendous power compressed into a single point. Yet in this image, the explosion never occurs. The threat has been neutralized. The force remains present, but it is controlled. This is Saturn operating at its highest expression within Aries. Over the past several months, many people have experienced situations that tested their ability to regulate themselves. They wanted to react. They wanted to force outcomes. They wanted immediate answers. They wanted to fight battles, defend positions, prove points, and push forward at full speed. But Saturn demanded restraint. Again and again, it asked for maturity. Again and again, it required patience. Again and again, it challenged individuals to transform impulse into strategy. That process has not always felt comfortable. Perhaps there were conversations you chose not to escalate. Perhaps there were emotional reactions you consciously contained. Perhaps there were moments when anger, frustration, or disappointment could have created lasting damage if expressed recklessly. Yet somehow you managed to hold the line. You learned how to channel force without becoming controlled by it. You learned how to maintain discipline while under pressure. You learned how to preserve energy rather than wasting it. And now these two symbols begin interacting through today's sextile. The story they tell together is extraordinary. The disciplined containment represented by Saturn creates the exact conditions required for mastery represented by the Sun. The power that might have been wasted through impulsive actions becomes available for creation. The energy that might have been consumed by conflict becomes available for achievement. The emotional intensity that could have exploded outward becomes redirected into excellence. Think about how profound that truly is. The reason you are prepared to step onto a larger stage now is not despite the pressure you endured. It is because of it. The reason your work has depth is not despite the challenges. It is because those challenges refined you. Every moment of restraint became fuel. Every act of discipline became structure. Every decision to remain focused instead of reactive became part of the foundation supporting what is emerging now. In practical terms, today's alignment asks for action rather than observation. The symbolism favors formalization. Anything that has remained informal deserves structure. Verbal understandings deserve documentation. Creative collaborations deserve agreements. Partnerships deserve clarity. Promises deserve commitment. Gemini governs communication and exchange. Saturn governs responsibility and legitimacy. Together they support the movement from discussion into reality. This is also an important day for personal recognition. Many people underestimate their own progress because they become accustomed to carrying it. Growth often feels normal to the person experiencing it. Yet if you were to compare who you are today with who you were 3 years ago, the differences would likely be undeniable. Today's energy encourages an honest review, not to inflate the ego, not to seek superiority, but to establish accuracy. You cannot align your identity with your achievements if you refuse to acknowledge what you have achieved. Write it down, review it, examine the evidence. Allow reality to speak louder than self-doubt. This alignment also strengthens connections between experience and wisdom. Saturn has always represented elders, teachers, mentors, and established knowledge. The Sun brings awareness and illumination. Together, they create a favorable atmosphere for learning from those who have already traveled the road ahead. If guidance has been available but ignored, today may reveal its value. If there is someone whose perspective could help you avoid unnecessary mistakes, this energy supports reaching out. Another important theme centers around boundaries. Many individuals struggle because they continually accept responsibilities that do not belong to them. They overextend. They overcommit. They give away time and energy until exhaustion becomes normal. Today's alignment supports a different approach. It favors clarity. It favors definition. It favors the conscious decision to determine what you are responsible for and what you are not. Boundaries established under Saturn tend to endure because they are rooted in self-respect rather than emotional reaction. This is also a powerful period for making commitments official. Projects, launches, public announcements, contracts, relationship milestones. Any structure designed with integrity today benefits from the stabilizing influence flowing through the alignment. And there is another subtle detail hidden beneath all of this. Both the Sun and Saturn currently occupy the second decan of their respective signs. Many people overlook decans entirely, yet they add an additional layer of meaning. Each zodiac sign is divided into 3 10-degree sections, and these sections carry their own planetary influences. The second decan of Gemini is ruled by Mars within the traditional system and Venus within the modern system. The second decan of Aries is ruled by the Sun. What emerges from this arrangement is a fascinating energetic conversation beneath the surface, a quiet exchange of dignity and support, a subtle reinforcement that strengthens the connection already being formed between visibility and discipline, between mastery and control, between earned authority and the courage required to embody it. And that hidden interaction reveals yet another reason why today's alignment feels far more significant than it first appears. There is an even deeper reason. This alignment feels less like an ordinary transit and more like a formal initiation into a new chapter of your life. Beneath the visible mechanics of the Sun and Saturn sextile, another subtle astrological principle is operating, one that helps explain why today's energy carries such a profound sense of legitimacy and recognition. Saturn currently occupies a section of the zodiac associated with the Sun's influence, while simultaneously receiving a harmonious aspect directly from the Sun itself. In symbolic terms, the architect is working under the authority of the king. The builder is receiving instructions from the source of identity and purpose. The guardian of structure is responding to the call of individual vision. That distinction matters more than most people realize. For months, many individuals have felt trapped between personal ambition and external systems. They have wondered whether their goals could coexist with institutional expectations. They have questioned whether they would eventually need to compromise their authenticity in order to gain acceptance. Deep down, there has often been an underlying fear that recognition would require sacrificing independence. Today's alignment tells a different story. Instead of forcing you to fight against existing structures, it creates an environment where those structures begin recognizing the value of what you have already become. There is a profound psychological shift that occurs when a person stops seeking permission and starts receiving acknowledgement. One energy is rooted in insecurity. The other is rooted in earned authority. That is what makes this moment feel so powerful. The symbolic language of this alignment suggests that broader systems, whether those systems appear as employers, institutions, communities, clients, professional networks, family structures, or social circles, become more receptive to your demonstrated competence. The validation arriving now is not based on charisma alone. It is not dependent on persuasion. It is not created through force. It emerges because your actions have created a record that can no longer be ignored. Imagine spending years constructing something brick by brick while few people paid attention. Imagine refining a skill, developing a business, strengthening a relationship, building expertise, or creating a body of work without immediate reward. During that process, there are countless moments when progress feels invisible. There are periods when the external world offers little confirmation that your efforts matter. Yet eventually, a threshold is crossed. A point arrives where the evidence becomes impossible to dismiss. That is the atmosphere surrounding this alignment. It functions almost like an official certification process. The review has been completed, the qualifications have been examined, the foundation has been tested. What once required constant explanation now speaks for itself. And perhaps the most meaningful part of this symbolism is that acceptance does not require surrendering your individuality. You are not being absorbed into a system that erases your identity. You are not being asked to become smaller in order to fit. You are not abandoning your vision to satisfy someone else's expectations. Instead, your personal vision becomes the very reason the system recognizes you. That is why this energy feels less like compromise and more like integration. The authority you have cultivated internally begins finding a reflection externally. The structures around you stop feeling like obstacles and start functioning as support mechanisms. The door opens not because you forced it open, but because your readiness finally matched the opportunity standing behind it. Yet as significant as today's alignment may be, its importance extends far beyond June 2nd itself. In many ways, today is not the destination. It is the preparation. It is the foundation. It is the moment when the ground is reinforced before something much larger arrives. Because exactly 1 week later, on June 9th, another extraordinary astrological event takes place. Venus forms a perfect conjunction with Jupiter in Cancer. Among all planetary combinations, this is considered one of the most generous and supportive alignments available. Jupiter reaches exceptional strength in Cancer because it is exalted there, allowing its expansive and beneficial qualities to operate with remarkable effectiveness. Venus contributes themes of affection, harmony, attraction, beauty, relationships, comfort, resources, and financial prosperity. When these two planetary forces unite in Cancer, the emphasis naturally flows toward emotional well-being, domestic stability, family connections, nurturing environments, and material security. For many people, this type of alignment represents blessings arriving in visible form. Opportunities expand, relationships deepen, resources increase, support becomes easier to access, emotional fulfillment grows. Life begins offering evidence that previous efforts were not in vain. But there is an important truth hidden beneath every period of expansion. Growth without structure rarely lasts. Abundance without discipline often disappears as quickly as it arrives. Opportunities can be wasted, resources can be mismanaged, blessings can become distractions rather than foundations. History is filled with examples of people receiving more than they were prepared to sustain. This is why today's Sun and Saturn sextile matters so much. Before expansion arrives, structure arrives. Before the harvest appears, the storage must be built. Before the river rises, the banks must be strong enough to contain it. The alignment occurring today serves exactly that purpose. It creates the container. It establishes the framework. It reinforces the foundations that allow future growth to remain stable. Think about it this way. Imagine receiving a sudden increase in opportunities while lacking clear priorities. Imagine attracting greater financial resources without healthy habits. Imagine experiencing professional recognition without confidence. Imagine entering a period of emotional fulfillment while still carrying unresolved patterns that sabotage intimacy. The blessings themselves would not be the problem. The inability to hold them would be. Today's energy addresses that challenge before it emerges. Saturn asks you to become capable of sustaining what Jupiter will later expand. Saturn teaches responsibility before abundance arrives. Saturn teaches stewardship before rewards appear. And that preparation transforms everything. Because when the Venus and Jupiter conjunction arrives on June 9th, the structures built today become the reason those blessings can take root, rather than simply passing through. You are not merely preparing for a good day, you are preparing for an entirely different level of stability. You are constructing something capable of supporting future growth. You are creating conditions that allow prosperity, connection, and emotional security to endure beyond a temporary moment of luck. And this realization brings us back to the pressure many people have been carrying throughout recent months. If life has felt unusually demanding since February, there is a reason. If progress has seemed slower than expected, there is a reason. If every achievement has appeared to require twice the effort and 3 times the patience, there is a reason. Saturn's journey through Aries has been relentless in its expectations. Again and again, it has placed individuals in situations that demanded maturity. Again and again, it has required restraint when impulsiveness seemed easier. Again and again, it has asked people to prove the strength of their commitment. Many have felt exhausted by the process. Many have wondered why every step forward seemed accompanied by another test. Many have questioned whether the pressure would ever ease. Yet from Saturn's perspective, none of those experiences were random. Every challenge served a purpose. Every delay carried a lesson. Every obstacle revealed an area requiring greater strength. The pressure was never designed to break you. It was designed to prepare you. And now, as this alignment reaches its peak, something begins to shift. The season of constant testing starts moving toward a season of recognition. The lessons begin revealing their value. The effort begins producing visible results. The structure you have been building under pressure is finally becoming strong enough to support what is coming next. And that realization alone may explain why, deep inside, many people can already feel that something important is changing, even before the evidence fully appears in the outer world.